How's it going, everyone? This is Dixon of Vintage Realms of Gaming logging on, and I'm kickstarting off 2016 with the Retron 5 clone console from Hyperkin. Yes, I finally got one of these after it's been released over a year and a half ago. Then again, it's probably the best thing I got one as of now, because since it's released, Hyperkin plenty of times to work out the kinks. The Retron 5 has 5 cartridge inputs, which allows you to play all regions of 16-bit Sega Genesis / Mega Drive games, the 16-bit Super Nintendo / Super Famicom games, the 8-bit Nintendo games, the 8-bit Nintendo Famicom, and on the front of the Retron 5 console, a Game Boy Advance port, which allows you to play the original Game Boy games, the Game Boy Color games, and the Game Boy Advance games. And one more to add to the list. If you have a power-based converter for the Sega Genesis, you can also play the 8-bit Sega Master System games on the Retron 5. The looks of the Retron 5 console looks beautiful. It's more sturdier than the Retron 3 console, and like the Retron 3 console, it has 2 controller ports of each Sega Genesis, the Nintendo, and Super Nintendo. 1 port on each side of the Retron 5 console. And of course the Retron 5 has a default controller, and it even has its own shelf for that controller, which that part of the console can be used as a handle too. I'll get to the default Retron 5 controller in a minute. Now let's take a look on the back of the console. It has an AC adapter outlet, of course, a mini USB outlet, an HDMI port, and an SD card reader slot. That's what's on the Retron 5 console. Now the Retron 5 default controller. The default controller that the Hyperkin designed for the Retron 5 is a major improvement over the default controllers that Hyperkin had on the Retron 3. Yeah, the Retron 3 controllers are a pile of shit. The Retron 5 controller has a Bluetooth feature instead of this infrared crap like the Retron 3 had. And the Retron 5 controller has 6 buttons on the front along with 2 shoulder buttons, plus a start and select button and a home button. The controller also has a built-in battery, and just like the PlayStation 3 controller, you can charge the controller with a mini USB cable that plugs into the back of the console. So Hyperkin is taking a bigger step in the right direction with this one. But let's don't get too excited. The default controller on the Retron 5 is still far from perfect. The biggest drawback with this controller is the replacement of a regular D-pad with a crappy thumbstick. A crappy thumbstick that doesn't work like it's supposed to, especially in fighting games like Mortal Kombat. You can't pull off a proper button combination with this pathetic stick. And another drawback is that the buttons do feel a little cheap, but at least the buttons on the Retron 5 controller operate a lot better than the craptastic controller on the Retron 3 did. But the biggest red flag about the Retron 5 controller is the thumbstick. And oh yeah, the Retron 5 only came with 1 controller this time. But you can buy an extra Retron 5 controller roughly for $40, but I wouldn't bother. Because like the Retron 3, Retron 5 has all 3 pair of controller ports. The Genesis, the Super Nintendo, and the Nintendo. And what's way better about Retron 5 with any controller is that you can edit or do mapping for each controller setting that you like for each console port. Now that's really smooth. But unfortunately, you can't do any light gun games on the Retron 5 at all, since the console output only has an HDMI port, so this console only works on HD TVs, and light guns don't work on HD TVs at all. Sorry, light gun gamers. Which leads me to the next part of the Retron 5 console. It only has an HDMI output, so it'll only work on a high-definition television. And what's better about that is that the Retron 5 upscales any game you put in the console up to 780p, and it looks bloody badass. And there's plenty of types of screen settings you can choose from. Retron 5 also has a system menu, just like modern consoles do, and it has a built-in memory. And plus, like I said, it also has an SD card reader for extra memory. And there's other things that the SD card can be used for, such as adding patches for updates from the Hyperkin website, which all you have to do is plug in the SD card into your computer, download the files from the site, then unzip the files and put them on the card, then put the card back into the Retron 5 console and install the updates. My console already has the latest firmware updates, so I'm not too concerned about the update as of now. You can also download a set of cheats from the Hyperkin website. That also includes Game Genie cheats, so I don't even need an actual Game Genie. So at least you're saving the hassle for that part, because using the Game Genie inserting the codes is a real pain in the ass. And there's also translation fixes too, which files can be found on other websites, and I haven't gotten to that part yet, but at least it's interesting to know, just in case if you have an imported game, you can translate the language. Cartridges. The cartridge inputs on the Retron 5. I heard stories from the beginning on how easy the cartridges are to insert, but they can be tough to pull out, without putting a grip on both cartridge and console, while doing so. But it seems like they fixed that issue with the recent versions of Retron 5, because I haven't had too much trouble getting the cartridges out. But some still can be an issue to pull out, like for Super Nintendo games, because some of the Super Nintendo games have different chipsets set in them, like Super FX chips, and different type of contact points. And some of the Sega Genesis games with a different style carts, like from EA or Accolade, those kind can also be a bitch to pull out. Other than that, I don't have too much of a cartridge issue when inserting or removing. I do also recommend to be sure that the cartridges are clean before inserting them, because the Retron 5 can be dirt or dust sensitive. A few ideas on how I clean my cartridges is either using Q-tips with rubbing alcohol, or using pre-moistened electronic wipes. The system itself is a part emulator. When it reads a cart, it dumps the ROM through the memory. That doesn't mean you can play the games without using the cart from there on. It would be cool if it did. And it doesn't work with downloaded ROMs that you use off an emulator on a PC. The system itself being part of an emulator, that's usually one of the consumer complaints, and I kinda agree. But then again, to me it's not a huge deal. After you insert a game, what it does is loads and tell you if the game works or not. If there's a title of the game on the top, then it tells you it does work. But some games do tend to fail to dump ROM. Fail to read cartridge, in other words. For instance, my NES copies of Super Mario Bros. 2 and Tetris failed to do so. Now, I wasn't sure if it was my copies of the games doing this or not, or is it just the games themselves that wasn't compatible, at least not yet. And I cleaned them pretty good, and they still don't work. But I also have 2 NES copies of Friday the 13th, and one of them had the same error, but the good news is, my other copy of Friday the 13th cartridge works perfectly. So it's probably trying to tell me that my console doesn't like my copies. It could be. But at least it reads the rest of Super Mario games, including Super Mario All-Stars, where I can play the enhanced version of Super Mario Bros. 2, and the Game Boy Advance port can also read the Game Boy port of Tetris. At least the Retron 5 does those games. And some games can be read as an unknown cartridge, but that doesn't mean the game is not playable. But if a cartridge being read as an unknown cartridge, you cannot have access to cheats or do load states. For instance, I have Road Rash 1 on the Genesis. It reads as an unknown cartridge, and it still plays very well. I'm not sure what the deal is of the cartridge being unreadable, but then again it could be just the card itself. And there is another issue with some games I've been having, is that some of the games, like Sonic 3, well, it reads the game, but when you make it to the sub-boss on stage 1, and when the flames come up, it constantly takes you to the Retron 5 startup menu. And when I say constantly, I mean every time. Retron 5 worked well with other Sonic games, including Sonic & Knuckles, but if you have Sonic 3 inserted into the Sonic & Knuckles cart, it does the same damn thing. And it doesn't seem like I'm the only one having that issue. There's others that also did. It's probably just the game itself. And I just recently ran into a similar issue with another Genesis game, the Genesis version of Saturday Night Slam Masters. When during the entrance of the wrestler, it does the same damn thing. But like I said, it's probably the game itself. I'm not quite sure, to be honest, but I do hope Hyperkin fixes these issues. The Retron 5 only can have one cartridge inserted into the console at a time, because it can only read one at a time. The Retron 5 cannot read flash cards. Like the EverDrives you can find at StoneAgeGamer.com, those do not work with any clone console to this day. Well, as far as I know, that is. And according to the earlier reviews on the Retron 5, it seems like they couldn't read any reproduction carts, or homebrew carts, or multi-carts, or hack cartridges, and some unlicensed carts. But I do believe they had updates that fixed that issue these days, and I heard they run really well. Now the reason why I said I believe is because I do not have any of those type of carts what I mentioned. Well, except I have one multi-cart, which is Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt cart, and that runs perfectly. Another minor issue about the Retron 5 is that the way you turn on the console. You have to hold down the power button for about 5 seconds, instead of just simply pressing the button like on any other console. And unlike modern consoles, you can't turn the console on or off with the controller, even though it has a home button in the system menu. But turning on the Retron 5 console is just a minor issue to address. Nothing too absurd about that. Despite all the drawbacks of the Retron 5 console, the Retron 5 is pretty amazing. It runs most of the games really well, and it upscales beautifully for each port. Another awesome thing about the console is that you can do save states, where you can save anywhere in the game wherever you want to, either on the system memory or on an SD card. Especially for the carts that have a built-in save that runs on the battery. And you can copy the save file from the cart to the console. And depending on what cart you have, you can do the opposite. And I also love the fact that you can use any cheats in the game without any issues. Well, first of all, the system doesn't come with cheats installed. You have to download the cheats from the Hyperkin website and use the SD card to transfer. So I guess you can call that a minor hassle. Above all, that's an awesome thing, because some games do intend to cheat themselves. And as the default price for the Retron 5 runs up to $140, but you can get one cheaper, but I would not recommend to use one unless if you get a super good deal on it. I got mine from eBay for about $115, and to me I think it's fair. Now there are many reviewers that did their take on the Retron 5 console, and some reviewers have different experiences with it. Probably because most of them did their take by the time the Retron 5 was released. And I have to admit myself, the Retron 5 console may not be perfect, but I still think it's pretty awesome, and I personally would recommend it. But I would also recommend that you check out other reviewers' take on the Retron 5 console first, and do a little bit more research before you make your final decision. Because chances are I might have missed a few things about the Retron 5 on my end. I totally think the Retron 5 is awesome, but I wouldn't take my word for it because I know for sure I left a few loose ends, and I didn't have everything to back those loose ends up. So I definitely recommend that you do more research on the Retron 5 and check out other reviewers' take on it, so that way they can help you decide better. As it stands out as of right now, the Retron 5 is pretty much the console I'll be doing most of the games that are compatible with the system. Unless if it's the games that don't work, I'll just do the games off the emulator from the PC. What I'll also do is make a list of games that do work and make a list of games that don't work in the description box. And every time from here on when I add a game to a collection and test it, I'll update the description list, and plus I'll leave a comment below to let you know that I updated the list. And plus I'll also leave a comment below if I find out anything new about the system, like new updates or what the new update does. Anyway, that's pretty much all there is I can tell as of now about the Retron 5. Please do like, leave a comment below, and subscribe to my Vintage Realms of Gaming YouTube channel. And you can also find my Vintage Realms of Gaming page on my social apps like Facebook or Twitter. Until next time, so long, everyone. Dixon, logging off.